Out of more than 500 shark species, only a few are notorious for their aggression and occasional attacks on humans. Among them, the great white shark stands out as the ocean's apex predator, dominating marine life and posing a serious threat to anyone who enters its territory, including human beings. This video will show you incidents when humans become part of its hunt. The winter sea was restless on January 7, 2025. Cold, slate-gray waves shimmered under a pale sky as the United States ship Nimitz carved a steady path through the waters off the coast of California. The aircraft carrier, one of the most formidable vessels in the United States Navy, carried its crew of over 5,000 as it conducted routine operations. Though the sheer size of the vessel inspired confidence, the ocean surrounding it was a different story. Vast, unpredictable, and merciless. Petty Officer James Donovan, 29, was among the sailors performing maintenance checks along the deck. The morning had been cold but manageable, and James moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to the elements. He was known for his meticulous work and unflappable demeanor. His duty that day was straightforward: inspect sections of the deck railing for any signs of wear from salt corrosion and high winds. The sea breeze picked up as James made his way toward the port side. Whitecaps crested on the waves below, and the wind hummed against the steel of the massive carrier. He pulled his jacket tighter and pressed forward. Despite the rough weather, the ship's crew moved like clockwork, each member focused on their specific role. As James crouched near the edge of the deck, the wind intensified without warning. A sudden, powerful gust struck him from behind, forcing him off balance. His boots skidded against the slick metal surface, and he instinctively reached for the railing, but his gloved hand slipped. In an instant, his body tipped over the side. There was no time for a shout, no chance to regain footing. He plunged downward, arms flailing, into the frigid water. The splash was swallowed by the roar of the sea and the hum of the ship's engines. It took several seconds for the nearest crew member to realize what had happened. Alarms blared across the deck as sailors scrambled into action. The ship's rescue protocol was swift. Inflatable boats were deployed, and search and rescue personnel readied themselves. The clock was ticking. In waters as cold as these, hypothermia could set in within minutes. James surfaced, gasping for air as the icy water stole his breath. His training kicked in, and he forced himself to remain calm, treading water and conserving energy. The waves tossed him mercilessly, each swell threatening to drag him under. He spotted the carrier looming in the distance, its size reduced by the vastness of the sea. Red smoke flares were deployed to mark his location, and he knew the crew was doing everything possible to reach him. But James wasn't alone. Beneath the surface, drawn by the commotion and splashing, a predator approached. A 14-foot great white shark, a shadow of muscle and teeth, moved with chilling grace. The waters off California were no stranger to these apex predators, but encounters this far from shore were rare. The shark's black eyes registered the frantic movement above, its instincts sharpened by hunger. James was unaware of the threat until it was too late. He felt a sudden, immense pressure on his right leg, followed by searing pain. The shark had latched onto him, its serrated teeth slicing through flesh and muscle. James thrashed, adrenaline surging through his body as he fought to free himself. Blood billowed into the water, turning it a murky red. The rescue team, now mere yards away, watched in horror as the water churned violently. One of the sailors manning the boat fired a signal flare into the sky, desperate to drive the shark away. James struggled with every ounce of strength he had, kicking and punching at the predator. The shark released him briefly, only to circle back, its movements deliberate and menacing. Weak from blood loss, James knew his chances were dwindling. His vision blurred, and the cold gnawed at his limbs. He tried to stay afloat, but his body was faltering. The rescue boat closed in, and a crewman extended a pole toward him. With a final, desperate effort, James reached for it, his fingers barely gripping the slick surface. The shark lunged again, but this time, the rescue team acted swiftly. One crew member wielding a gaff hook struck the shark's snout, causing it to veer off. Another sailor hauled James aboard, his body limp and drenched in seawater. Blood pooled beneath him as the crew worked frantically to stabilize his injuries. His leg was mangled beyond recognition, the bone exposed in jagged fragments. His breathing was shallow, his face pale. The inflatable boat sped back toward the Nimitz, where medical personnel awaited. They hoisted James onto the deck, and a medic immediately began applying a tourniquet to stem the bleeding. Despite their best efforts, it was clear that James's condition was critical. The helicopter for a medevac was already being prepared. As the helicopter blades sliced through the air, James's consciousness faded. His mind drifted between pain and numbness, his body teetering on the edge of survival. The medics worked tirelessly, their faces grim. Despite their efforts, James's pulse weakened, and by the time the helicopter reached the nearest medical facility, his heart had stopped. The news of his death spread quickly across the ship and later made headlines nationwide. James Donovan, a dedicated sailor and beloved crew member, was gone. The attack was a stark reminder of the ocean's unpredictability and the ever-present dangers faced by those who serve at sea. In the days that followed, the crew of the Nimitz held a solemn ceremony in James's honor. Flowers were released into the ocean where he had fallen, their bright colors stark against the dark water. The great white shark, elusive and ancient, remained a haunting presence in their memories. James's story became a testament to courage in the face of unimaginable odds. Though his life was cut tragically short, his legacy lived on among those who had fought to save him. The ocean that April 2, 2024 morning was calm, deceptively so. The early spring sun cast golden streaks over the waters near Santa Barbara, reflecting a picture of serenity that belied the dangers lurking beneath. The Coast Guard rescue team in the area had received an emergency distress call from a small vessel stranded due to mechanical failure. While not an uncommon situation, any call from open waters came with inherent risks. The team, experienced and efficient, wasted no time in deploying. Among them was Samantha Blake, a 29-year-old diver with years of search and rescue experience. Her task was straightforward: assess the vessel's damage, determine if the crew needed immediate evacuation, and assist with securing the boat for towing. As their patrol boat neared the stranded vessel, Samantha suited up, adjusting her oxygen tank and double-checking her gear. The stranded boat rocked gently, its lone radio antenna visible against the expanse of blue. The crew aboard waved to the rescue team, relief evident in their movements. Everything seemed routine, but the ocean often had a way of rewriting plans without warning. When Samantha slid into the water, the familiar cold rushed over her skin, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the sun above. She moved with precision, her body accustomed to the deep, her mind focused on the task at hand. The underwater world, bathed in shifting light, seemed undisturbed. Fish darted through patches of seaweed, and the hull of the stranded boat loomed ahead. Then, from the corner of her vision, she noticed it. A shadow, long and deliberate, moving just beyond the sunlit depths. At first it was distant, almost imperceptible against the darker blue of the open ocean. But as she adjusted her position, the outline became unmistakable. A great white shark, at least 16 feet long, gliding just beyond the range of immediate threat. It was close enough for its presence to register, but far enough that its intentions remained unclear. Samantha knew better than to panic. Sharks often circled out of curiosity, assessing movements and responding to disturbances in the water. They were apex predators, but not mindless killers. Even so, the knowledge did little to slow the sudden tightening in her chest. She kept her movements deliberate, avoiding sudden shifts that could be perceived as prey-like behavior. Above her, the team was watching. The moment she signaled shark in the vicinity, their alertness increased. The boat's crew, still stranded, clutched the railings, watching the water with wide eyes. For several minutes, the shark simply circled, its movements calculated, deliberate. Samantha hovered near the hull, careful to maintain her position without drawing undue attention. But then, something changed. The shark, which had been maintaining its distance, turned more directly toward her. The slow, detached curiosity shifted into something sharper, more intent. It wasn't just observing anymore. It was assessing. A sudden movement disrupted the water above. Perhaps a misplaced splash or an accidental shift in the boat's position. Whatever it was, it triggered a reaction. The great white moved swiftly, its body cutting through the water with terrifying efficiency. It wasn't an immediate attack, but a display of dominance, a silent warning. Then, without hesitation, the shark rammed into the metal rescue cage that hung just beyond the patrol boat, its force sending a reverberating clang through the water. The impact jolted Samantha, pushing her backward and disorienting her for a split second. It was all the shark needed to close the distance. The next moments unfolded in a blur of instinct and adrenaline. Samantha kicked hard, angling her body toward the surface while signaling for an emergency pullback. The shark followed, its massive head turning just as she reached the halfway point. Another violent strike, this time against the side of the stranded vessel, shook the entire structure, causing the people above to stumble. Samantha felt the resistance as the team above yanked her lifeline, pulling her toward the surface with rapid force. But the shark wasn't done. As she ascended, it followed, closing the distance again with terrifying speed. Its jaws opened, revealing rows of teeth designed for destruction. The sheer power in its movement sent a pulse of dread through her system. The rescue boat crew acted fast, throwing emergency deterrents into the water, electronic pulse devices meant to dissuade large predators. The shark hesitated, reacting to the disruption, but it wasn't enough to fully drive it away. It veered slightly but didn't leave. As Samantha broke the surface, hands reached down, pulling her aboard in one fluid motion. Her breathing was rapid, her muscles locked with tension. The moment she was clear, the shark struck the cage once more, sending another deep clang echoing through the hull. It was territorial now, no longer just a curious observer, but an aggressive force claiming the area. The decision to abort the rescue came swiftly. The stranded crew, now fully aware of the danger, knew they had no choice but to wait for alternative assistance. The Coast Guard team couldn't risk another descent with the shark actively patrolling the waters. Even as the patrol boat sped away, the shark lingered, its dorsal fin sliced through the surface, following for a short distance before eventually disappearing beneath the waves. It won this encounter. The ocean remained its domain, unpredictable and unforgiving. Back on shore, the reality of the situation settled in. Samantha, though unharmed physically, carried the weight of the encounter in every muscle of her body. The team debriefed, reviewing footage and assessing the decision to abandon the mission. There had been no other choice. The risk had been too great. The incident quickly gained attention. News outlets picked up the story, labeling it one of the most aggressive shark encounters in recent years. Marine biologists weighed in, discussing possible explanations: territorial instincts, hunger, or even an increase in human activity disrupting natural patterns. But the most sobering reality remained. Despite all the safety protocols and all the knowledge, the ocean was never a place of certainty. For the stranded boat crew, rescue eventually came through alternative means, though the memory of being caught in that shark's domain lingered. The morning of January 29, 2025, unfolded like any other along the sun-drenched coastline of Malibu. The Pacific stretched endlessly, a shimmering expanse of blue under a crisp winter sky. The waves rolled in gently, their rhythmic crash against the shore creating a familiar, soothing soundtrack. Surfers bobbed in the distance waiting for the perfect wave, while seagulls drifted lazily overhead. Derek Thompson, 33, had always been drawn to the ocean. It was his escape, his place of solitude. A thrill-seeker by nature, he found his greatest joy in speeding across the water on his jet ski, feeling the spray against his skin, the wind roaring in his ears. That morning, the conditions were perfect. Clear skies, light winds, and a sea that stretched wide and welcoming. As he navigated the open water, he felt invincible. The powerful engine beneath him responded effortlessly as he carved through the waves, leaving a white froth in his wake. He had ridden these waters countless times, always feeling in control, always believing that nothing could go wrong. But the ocean is a place of secrets, and on that day, beneath the glassy surface, something stirred. Without warning, a massive shadow emerged from the depths. It moved with quiet precision, a hunter built by nature for ambush and domination. The 15-foot great white shark had been lurking unnoticed, drawn by the vibrations of the jet ski cutting through the water. In the vastness of the ocean, Derek had no idea that he had unknowingly entered the domain of an apex predator. Then in an instant, everything changed. The shark struck with terrifying force, slamming its powerful body into the jet ski. The impact was brutal, tilting the machine sideways and sending Derek flying into the frigid water. The moment his body hit the surface, shock coursed through him. The Pacific in January was mercilessly cold, and the sudden immersion knocked the breath from his lungs. Instinct took over as he kicked hard, desperate to reach his jet ski. But before he could orient himself, the water beneath him shifted. A sudden violent pull yanked him downward, and searing pain exploded in his leg. The great white had found its target. The shark's jaws clamped down with crushing pressure, its serrated teeth slicing through flesh and muscle with surgical precision. Derek's scream was lost in the water as he flailed, instinctively trying to free himself. His heart pounded wildly, his vision blurred by a mix of salt water and fear. He twisted, kicked, and punched, anything to make the shark release him. But great whites are not creatures that let go easily. The shark shook its massive head from side to side, tearing deeper into its prey. Blood clouded the water in thick, dark plumes, drifting like ink in the vast blue. The scent of it sent the shark into an even greater frenzy. Derek's body convulsed in agony, his survival instincts battling against the inevitable. The predator released him for a moment, but before he could react, it struck again, jaws snapping around his torso with devastating force. The sheer power of the bite shattered bones instantly. His world was reduced to pain, to the crushing weight of an unstoppable force dragging him deeper, away from the light, away from air. Above the surface, the ocean seemed unchanged, indifferent to the horror unfolding beneath it. The jet ski drifted idly, engine still humming, oblivious. The horizon remained calm, beautiful even, as if nothing had happened. Farther out, a fishing boat cut through the waves. The crew had been hauling in their nets when one of them noticed the disturbance in the water. A jet ski floating unattended, a flash of red spreading unnaturally through the blue. Curiosity turned to alarm as they steered toward the scene, their eyes scanning the surface for any sign of its rider. Then they saw it. A figure emerged, barely visible through the churning water. At first it looked like Derek had made it to the surface, but as the boat neared, horror set in. His body was limp, floating on the current, motionless except for the gentle push of the tide. His wetsuit was shredded, his torso marked with deep gaping wounds. The water around him was dark, thick with the unmistakable stain of blood. The fishermen worked quickly, hauling him onto the deck with trembling hands. The moment they laid him down, it was clear that he was beyond saving. His face was pale, lips parted as if he had tried to take one last breath before slipping away. His arms, once strong and full of life, lay useless at his sides, his chest barely rising. One of the crew members pressed a hand against Derek's neck, searching desperately for any sign of a pulse. For a moment, there was nothing. Just silence, just disbelief. Then a faint, weak flutter beneath the fingertips. He was still alive. Barely. The boat's radio crackled as they called for help, their voices urgent, pleading. The Coast Guard responded immediately, dispatching a rescue team to meet them at the nearest dock. Time stretched unbearably as they sped toward shore, every second feeling impossibly long. By the time the paramedics reached them, Derek was slipping away. His body was shutting down, drained by blood loss, by trauma too severe to withstand. They worked desperately, applying pressure, administering oxygen, and doing everything they could to hold on to the fragile thread of life that remained. But the ocean had already taken its claim. Derek was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital, his injuries too extensive, his body too broken. The news spread quickly through Malibu, sending shockwaves through the tight-knit surf and boating communities. Those who had seen him that morning, laughing, full of life, struggled to comprehend how swiftly and mercilessly it had all been taken away. The attack sparked immediate debates about shark activity along the California coast. Marine biologists weighed in, explaining that great whites were common in the area, particularly during migration seasons. Some argued that more precautions needed to be taken, that warnings should be issued, and that jet skiers and surfers needed to be more aware. Others, however, defended the shark, reminding everyone that the ocean was its home and that Derek had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Days later, a memorial was held on the beach where Derek had spent so much of his life. His family, his friends, and fellow surfers gathered to honor him and to share stories of his fearless spirit and his love for adventure. May 18, 2023, started like any other day on the water for Jason Foster and his crew. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt and fish as their boat bobbed steadily on the rolling waves off the coast of Maine. Jason, a seasoned fisherman with over 2 decades of experience, had long been accustomed to the unpredictability of the sea. The waters they navigated were known for their abundance of fish, but also occasional sightings of great whites. Still, sharks had never been more than a distant concern, something to be aware of, but never something to fear. That day, the crew was focused on hauling in their latest catch. The sun was high, reflecting off the rippling water as the men worked together to pull in a heavy net brimming with fish. The weight was substantial, evidence of a successful outing. Laughter and chatter filled the air as they anticipated a profitable return to shore. But beneath them, hidden in the vast blue depths, something else was watching. A silent predator, drawn by the vibrations of struggling fish and the unmistakable scent of blood in the water, had begun to circle. The great white, nearly 14 feet long, had been tracking the North Star for some time. At first, it was observed from a distance, its dark silhouette barely visible beneath the surface. It followed the shifting patterns of the boat, sensing opportunity in the commotion above. Then, as the crew fought to bring in their haul, the shark made its decision. With one powerful stroke of its tail, it propelled itself upward, closing the distance between predator and prey. The attack came without warning. In a violent explosion of water and force, the shark breached the surface, its massive body momentarily airborne before it crashed down onto the side of the boat. Its jaws, lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth, snapped shut around the fishing net, tearing through it like paper. Fish scattered as the net was ripped apart, some slipping free into the water while others dangled helplessly in the chaos. The crew erupted into action. The boat rocked violently under the sudden force, sending Jason stumbling backward. One of his deckhands, a younger fisherman named Eric, lost his balance entirely, slipping toward the edge. The shark, thrashing wildly in an attempt to free itself from the torn net, sent waves slamming against the side of the boat, drenching everything in a salty spray. The air filled with shouts and the desperate sound of men fighting to regain control. Jason lunged forward, gripping a railing as he struggled to assess the situation. The shark was now half submerged, its powerful tail thrashing against the hull. With another forceful movement, it ripped free from the net completely, sending debris flying across the deck. But the predator was far from finished. With its hunger fully ignited, the shark turned its attention to the nearest source of movement. Eric, still unsteady, had stumbled dangerously close to the boat's edge. In a terrifying instant, the shark surged upward again, its mouth open wide as it aimed for him. Jason barely had time to react. He threw his weight forward, grabbing Eric by the back of his jacket and yanking him away just as the shark's teeth snapped shut where he had stood a moment before. The sheer force of the lunge sent another fisherman, Paul, sprawling onto the deck. His arm struck a bucket of fish remains, spilling blood and guts across the floor. The scent thickened in the air, further enticing the already aggressive predator. The shark, still in a frenzy, circled back, its dorsal fin slicing through the water like a blade. Jason's mind raced. He had seen sharks before, but never this bold, never this relentless. It wasn't just after the fish, it was hunting now, testing the limits of its dominance. Every instinct told him they had to get out of there and fast. He grabbed a long wooden pole, slamming it against the side of the boat in an attempt to deter the shark. It veered off momentarily, but remained close, still hungry, still waiting. The crew scrambled, pulling Eric away from the edge while Paul gritted his teeth against the pain in his arm. The boat's engine roared as another crew member, Michael, shoved the throttle forward, propelling it away from the attack zone. The sudden burst of speed sent the shark reeling, forcing it to adjust its course. For several tense moments they watched as the great white followed, its shadow gliding just beneath the surface. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it disappeared. The water went still, the ocean reclaiming its usual rhythm as if nothing had ever happened. But the aftermath was undeniable. The deck was in shambles, nets torn, fish scattered, supplies knocked loose. Eric sat trembling, his hands shaking as he stared at the spot where he had nearly been taken. Paul's arm was bleeding, though not severely, and Jason could already see the forming bruises from where he had slammed into the railings. The air, once filled with laughter and the anticipation of a good day's work, was now thick with unease. They had survived, but just barely. As they made their way back to shore, Jason couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. He had always respected the ocean, knowing full well that it belonged first and foremost to the creatures within it. But this was different. This was a reminder, a brutal, unforgiving lesson in the raw power of nature. By the time the boat docked, the news had already spread. Local fishermen, authorities, and reporters gathered. Their faces were a mix of concern and curiosity. The story of the attack quickly became the talk of the town, igniting debates about fishing safety in shark-prone waters. Experts weighed in, citing environmental shifts and dwindling food sources as possible reasons for the great white's aggressive behavior. Stricter protocols were soon implemented, requiring fishing crews to carry deterrents and reinforcing guidelines on handling catches in known shark territory. But for Jason and his crew, no regulation or precaution could erase the memory of that day. The ocean had shown its teeth, and they had barely lived to tell the tale. As Jason stood on the dock, watching the water stretch endlessly before him, he knew one thing for certain: they would be back. Because no matter how dangerous the sea could be, it was still their livelihood, their world. But now they would return with a deeper understanding of the forces lurking beneath the waves. And with that knowledge came an unshakable truth. Out here, they were never truly in control. September 23, 2024 was a perfect day in Miami Beach. The sun hovered high in the sky, painting the ocean in shades of gold and deep blue while waves lapped lazily against the shore. Beachgoers lounged on towels, children ran laughing through the sand, and surfers waited for the next rolling swell. Among them was Rachel Thompson, 30, a strong swimmer who had spent countless hours in the ocean. The water had always been her sanctuary, warm, vast, and endlessly inviting. That afternoon, the conditions were ideal. The tide was just right, and the water was crystal clear, stretching out like a mirror reflecting the late summer sky. Rachel waded in, feeling the familiar embrace of the sea around her. The coolness washed over her skin, offering relief from the sweltering Florida heat. She swam out past the breakers, the sounds of the beach fading behind her as she lost herself in the rhythm of the ocean. The surface was calm, but beneath the waves, a silent predator was already on the move. A bull shark, roughly 10 feet long, was gliding through the depths, drawn closer by the vibrations of movement in the water. Bull sharks were notorious for their aggressive nature and ability to thrive in both salt and fresh water, making them one of the most unpredictable species along the coast. Unlike great whites, which often attacked out of curiosity, bull sharks were territorial, and this one had locked onto Rachel's presence with quiet intent. She swam further, unaware of the danger that lurked just beneath her. The water was clear enough that she could see fish darting beneath her, moving in synchronized patterns like silver ribbons twisting in the currents. The peaceful moment was shattered in an instant. The first strike came without warning. A sharp, searing pain shot through her right leg as something tore into her flesh. For a split second she thought it was a jellyfish sting, but the force was too strong, too deep. She kicked instinctively, trying to shake off whatever had grabbed her, but then she saw it. A shadow beneath her, a dark mass moving with terrifying speed. The shark was turning, its powerful tail propelling it through the water, ready for another strike. Rachel's body reacted before her mind could catch up. Panic surged through her as she twisted away, trying to push herself toward the shore. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, her breath coming in short, frantic bursts as adrenaline flooded her system. She was still a good distance from safety, and the realization gripped her with cold terror. She wasn't alone in the water anymore. The bull shark circled, its dorsal fin cutting the surface like a knife. It wasn't finished. The taste of blood in the water had triggered its predatory instincts, and it moved closer, following her every desperate stroke. Rachel's injured leg burnt, the wound leaking red into the surrounding blue, a beacon that invited further attack. The beach felt impossibly far away. Her arms ached as she propelled herself forward, every motion feeling slower than it should. The shark surged again, brushing against her side, testing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. It wasn't just hunting, it was toying with her, a predator savoring the fear in its prey. Then a glimmer of hope appeared. A jet ski was skimming across the waves, its engine humming over the chaos of her frantic struggle. A lifeguard, or maybe a passerby, had spotted her and was racing toward her position. She had to reach it. She had to make it before the shark did. With one final burst of energy, she pushed forward, ignoring the pain that throbbed through her leg. The shark was still there, still watching, its black eyes locked onto her every movement. The jet ski slowed just ahead of her, the rider reaching out. With the last of her strength, she lunged, grasping the side of the jet ski just as another surge of water signaled the shark's approach. A powerful tug yanked her backward for a fraction of a second, the shark's teeth grazing her calf as she was pulled onto the ski. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The shark vanished beneath the waves, its dark shape retreating into the depths. Rachel collapsed onto the jet ski, her breath ragged, her body trembling from shock and exhaustion. Blood streamed from her leg, staining the surface of the water below. She barely registered the rush back to shore, the people gathering around, the sirens in the distance. The pain was overwhelming, but the reality of what had happened hadn't fully settled in. She was alive, barely, but alive. The aftermath rippled through Miami in the days that followed. News of the attack spread quickly, making headlines across the country. Videos taken by beachgoers showed the moments before and after the sight of the jet ski racing toward shore, with Rachel slumped against it, her leg covered in blood. The images were haunting, a grim reminder of the hidden dangers that lurked just beyond the sand. Rachel was airlifted to a nearby hospital where doctors worked to stabilize her condition. The shark's bite had torn deep into her calf, severing muscle and leaving a jagged wound that would take months to heal. She had lost a significant amount of blood, but miraculously no major arteries had been severed. The surgeons managed to save her leg, though it would never be the same again. The attack reignited debates about shark activity near the city's beaches. Experts weighed in, explaining that bull sharks were more aggressive in warm waters, especially during late summer when they moved closer to shore in search of food. Lifeguards increased patrols, and local authorities issued warnings urging swimmers to stay within designated areas. Rachel, however, faced a different kind of battle, the psychological aftermath. The ocean, once her refuge, had become a place of terror. The memory of the shark's eyes, the crushing force of its bite, and the helplessness of being hunted, all of it replayed in her mind every time she closed her eyes. The scars on her leg would fade, but the fear would take longer to heal. Still, as the weeks passed, she found herself drawn to the water again. She watched the waves from a distance, feeling the pull of something she had always loved, something that had nearly killed her. She wasn't sure if she would ever swim in the ocean again, but one thing was certain: she had survived. And that, at least, was something no shark could ever take away. The waters off South Africa were clear that day, the sun casting rippling golden reflections across the surface. The boat rocked gently, its white hull contrasting against the deep blue expanse beneath it. It was May 19, 2024, and Julia Kent, a seasoned diver with over a decade of experience, stood near the edge, adjusting her wetsuit as the anticipation built within her. She had participated in cage dives before, but this one held an extra thrill. The waters here were famous for their great white sharks, and the possibility of seeing one up close stirred a deep excitement in her. The metal cage, sturdy but weathered from years of similar excursions, sat suspended by thick ropes, waiting to be lowered into the abyss. The crew moved methodically, checking the integrity of the bars and ensuring the latches were secure. The other divers, 5 in total, shared the same eager energy, exchanging glances as they prepared to descend. Julia focused on her breathing, steadying herself for what was to come. This was not just an excursion for her, it was a way to witness one of nature's most formidable predators in its element. The moment the cage submerged, the world shifted. The noise of the surface faded into a muffled hum, replaced by the rhythmic sound of bubbles rising from their regulators. The water enveloped them, a vast and alien world stretching in all directions. Schools of fish darted in the distance, their silvery bodies catching the sunlight. Then a shadow emerged from the depths. At first, it was barely distinguishable from the blue haze of the ocean, but as it moved closer, its form solidified. An 18-foot great white shark, massive and deliberate, glided toward them. Its body was a masterpiece of evolution, sleek yet powerful, its eyes black and unreadable. It circled the cage once, its movements slow, calculated. The divers clutched the bars, their breath caught in awe. Even through the reinforced steel, there was no mistaking the primal presence of the predator before them. Julia studied the shark's behavior. It appeared curious but not aggressive, testing the waters and assessing the foreign structure in its domain. She had seen sharks behave this way before, a cautious approach, a few passes to gauge the unfamiliar. Then, without warning, the mood shifted. The great white turned sharply, its massive tail propelling it forward with startling speed. It rammed the cage, the impact sending a violent jolt through the structure. The metal groaned under the pressure. Air bubbles erupted from the divers' regulators as they flinched backward. The shark withdrew for a moment, then struck again, this time harder. The force was alarming, unlike anything Julia had experienced before. A sharp crack echoed through the water. One of the bars near the bottom gave way, snapping under the repeated assault. The gap was narrow but large enough for danger to slip through. The great white, sensing an opening, lunged. Its enormous head thrust through the broken section, its gaping jaws revealing rows of serrated teeth. The maw snapped shut just inches from Julia's leg, the water swirling in chaotic turbulence as she kicked away with every ounce of strength she had. Panic threatened to take hold, but instinct kept her moving. She pushed herself to the opposite side of the cage, gripping the bars so tightly that her knuckles ached. The other divers scrambled upward, their movements frantic. The shark, undeterred, thrashed its head, trying to force its way further inside. The water clouded with debris as the broken bar bent inward under the predator's sheer strength. The cage swayed dangerously. The crew above must have realized what was happening because the ropes jerked, signaling an emergency lift. But the shark wasn't done. It backed out, its dark eyes locking onto Julia. Then, with terrifying speed, it surged forward again, jaws snapping. This time it managed to wedge itself deeper. Julia twisted her body at the last second, the powerful bite missing her by mere inches. The pressure of its movement forced her against the opposite side of the cage, her oxygen tank scraping loudly against the bars. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. Time seemed to slow, every detail sharpening. The white of the shark's underbelly, the rough texture of its skin, the raw force in every movement. Her mind screamed for her to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The cage, her supposed protection, had become a trap. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the struggle shifted. The upward pull from the boat intensified, dragging the cage toward the surface. The great white, still ramming, found itself caught in an awkward angle. It twisted violently, its massive body thrashing against the limitations of the confined space. The force of its movement sent shockwaves through the water, but it couldn't break free as easily as it had entered. Then, with a final wrenching motion, the shark pulled itself backward. It hovered for a brief second, as if assessing the situation one last time. Then in an instant it vanished back into the depths, disappearing as quickly as it had attacked. The cage broke the surface, water rushing off its sides as the crew hauled it onto the deck. Julia gasped for air the moment her head emerged, dragging herself free of the mangled structure. Her limbs trembled, adrenaline still surging through her veins. Around her, the other divers clambered out, their faces pale and shocked. The realization of how close she had come to death settled in slowly. Her wetsuit was intact, but she could still feel the ghost of the shark's presence, its sheer power, the raw unpredictability of nature itself. The ocean had reminded her, in the most brutal way possible, that no amount of experience could ever erase the primal hierarchy of the deep. The crew examined the damage. The broken bars told the story in silent testimony. Cage diving was meant to be a controlled way to observe these apex predators, but today had proven that no cage was unbreakable. Julia knew that safety protocols would be scrutinized. As she sat on the deck, breathing deeply, she watched the horizon. The ocean was deceptively calm again, its surface betraying nothing of the chaos that had unfolded just moments ago. Somewhere beneath that vast expanse, the great white still swam, unfazed. For Julia, the experience had changed something within her. She had always respected the ocean, but today she had felt its true ferocity. And yet, as terrifying as it had been, there was a strange, undeniable exhilaration in having come face to face with one of nature's most perfect hunters, and surviving to tell the tale.